Okay, now we are gonna interview Ingela, and she's graduated from private technical University of Loja, and we're gonna make an interview about differences in the use of the sign language, and it will not take more than 5 to 10 minutes. So we're gonna start. Ingela, can you answer the first question about how can you differentiate language from dialect?
That's an interesting question. The truth is that the criteria that separate a language from a dialect are completely arbitrary and sometimes. In essence, both language and dialect are the same, but majorly for political reasons they are defined as one or the other. A language may be called that because speakers live within the limits of a certain country, as is the case with Swedish and Norwegian. We'll talk more about that later, but there are three parameters that linguists use to differentiate language from dialect. Well, the first one would be that the two related varieties are normally considered varieties of the same language if speakers of each dialect or each variety can understand the other based on knowledge by their own variety without needing to learn it. For example, I being a Swedish speaker can understand a basic conversation with a Norwegian speaker without actually having to actively study Norwegian. But there's also a parameter that talks about the existence of a common literature or common ethno-linguistic identity with a central variety that both varieties understand. Then they could be called dialects of the same language. But if there's enough intelligibility between varieties to enable communication, but there are well-established, distinct political identities, then they can be considered different language. And this is what happens with Norwegian and Swedish, for example.
Oh, okay, thank you for your answer. And now about the second question, how can you define morphology?
Well, the word is self-explanatory if you speak Greek. The first word, morph, means shape, form. And the second part, ology, means the study of something. So it's a study of the form of something. And in linguistics, morphology is the study of the forms of words. And what we just did is a morphological study of the word morphology.
Oh, okay, I got it. And how can you define syntax?
In short, word order. Syntax is the grammar, the structure of the elements in a statement or in a language. It's got a lot to do with the rules that the native speaker applies without thinking to his or her sentence formation. Think about Spanish, for example. We all speak the same way without having actively studied it because we've got the syntax in a way programmed in our brains from the first times we hear the language. It's part of the larger subject of grammar.
Okay. What is the most common way in which dialect of a language varies? Sorry.
I'm not sure about that one, but my bet is on pronunciation because it's the difference that is most obvious. At first, you may not notice that the person that's talking to you puts the verb in a different place than you would, for example, as long as the message is clear. But most people would react to words sound different right away.
Oh, and can you provide an example of dialect variation based on the option you just chose?
Sure. In American and British English, an American would say water, and British would say something like water. Or the verb shall is used to express the future, but in America it's considered a little more formal and will instead. I shall go home now as opposed to I will go home now. It's not something you think about as being extremely different, but it is something that you can identify who's who right away.
Okay, got it. What is the most common reason for dialects to vary?
Well, they vary by region and by social group. The truth is dialect diversity reflects the fact that languages change over time, and the fact that people live in the same area will contain the same social identity and thus share the same language norms. I guess guess an example could be the differences in the coast versus Sierra region here in Ecuador. There are different dialects caused by economic status or education level, but they can still be classified in two major groups, which would be the regional ones. Either you're from the coast or you're from the highlands.
Okay, next question, Ingela. Can you provide an example of dialect variation based on the option you just chose?
Well, there's this issue of pronunciation of the letter S. In the coast, we have a tendency to take it away from the place where it's supposed to be and put it in certain places where it's not supposed to be. And even though it's stronger in the less educated areas, you can still hear it sometimes when people from higher economic classes, with higher education levels, get home and they're comfortable with their family and friends, it sticks. You can still identify them as coming from this area.
Oh, okay, thank you. And taking into account English language, can you tell an existing difference in regard to pronunciation, spelling, and sentence formation between British and American English?
Sure. Pronunciation, I guess, when you have a kid, in America you have a daughter, but in you have a daughter. Spelling, I'll take the word color as an example. In America, you spell it C-O-L-O-R, and in Britain, you add a U, C-O-L-O-U-R. And when it comes to sentence formation, well, I can think of an example when it comes to grammar. You would use, in America, you would use the simple past tense, like, did you see my keys anywhere? And in Britain, you would use the past perfect. The present perfect. Have you seen my keys anywhere?
Okay, that were perfect examples. And taking into account Spanish language, can you tell an existing difference in regard to pronunciation, spelling, and sentence formation between coast and Sierra region speaker?
Well, we have the pronunciation. Here on the coast, we say lluvia, and in the Sierra, the double L at the beginning of the word is pronounced a little different. It's lluvia.
Yeah, that's right.
The spelling is the same. We follow the rules of the Real Academia Española, so we don't have a chance to develop our own spelling varieties.
That's right.
And when it comes to expressions, well, there is an expression you want somebody to check on your baby, you would say here, amárcame el niño. And the Sierra, I've heard the same idea expressed as, estarás viendo el guagua, eh? So there are certain differences. Also, on the coast, there's expressions as asúntate, when you want somebody to pay attention.
Oh, yeah.
And in the Sierra, the word for kiss is a little different from the word for costa. Here we say beso, over there they say muchita.
Oh, yeah. And now, the last question, Ingela. Is there any other dialect variation that you can tell how it happens?
Well, there's this thing I've noticed. The influence of indigenous language like Quechua and Shuar has on Spanish speakers that know both. Those languages are a subject, object, verb word order. And you can tell their influence in sentence formation when people would say in the Spanish we speak, estaba cruzando la calle. I was crossing the street, but they will form the sentence in Spanish like they were speaking one of these other languages, and they go full Yora, saying cruzando la calle estaba, which would mean crossing the street he was.
Okay. Thank you, Ingela, for accepting to be interviewed and just playing very well all about the difference from that language. So we're gonna finish. Do you want to say something else? No. Okay.
No, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Bye bye. That has been all.
Bye.
Great. Yeah.